So it's 11 o'clock on the East Coast. And my name is Will Stanley. I serve as a co-chair of the Seat Planning Committee. And my role here is just to welcome you and to serve as a kind of alternative host, that language we all now use in common parlance, and just to show gratitude from the Planning Committee for all of you all for being here. And I'm another person who can be kind of a liaison for questions and the like. So please feel free to reach out. I serve as the vicar at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia, which means that I basically work for Sarah Bartenstein, who's on this call. It's a great pleasure, and I'm so glad that y'all are here. And my role is just to turn it over to Stephen Hall, who's our moderator for this from St. Michael All Angels in Dallas. So reach out to me if you need me. So.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Like Will said, thank you. My name is Steve, and let's see, I'm gonna make one little switch here, go into turbo mode. If you're looking for the communications pre-conference track, then you are in the right place. As Will said, my name is Steve Hall. I'm the Director of Communications here at St. Michael and All Angels in Dallas, one of the co-hosts, along with Church of Transfiguration, for SEEP 2021. The panel today is focusing on the theme long-term crisis communications, sustaining sanity while surviving. As the planning committee was discussing things, a few different questions arose. After 12 months of responding to the pandemic, social unrest, and myriad other concerns, are we still even in crisis communications? Or has that given way to an unprecedented paradigm of a new status quo? Is this current reality sustainable? And at what cost to each of us as we continue on, either emotionally, physically, or psychologically? The subtext of this is the passage of time. Generally speaking, historically, these adrenaline-filled moments of crisis have not been in an indefinite time period like we're experiencing now. So the question of what to do as communicators, yet also how to maintain our own health as we communicate to the masses, is going to be the primary goal of today's sessions. A few words about today's sessions. The first one, of course, the moderated panel discussion, with the second one being a guided break room discussion period. So we're going to ask that not only are we aggregating your comments and questions here, but please, as you listen to the panelists, be sure to write down your own questions or talking points for the breakout rooms in the second session today. That'll be a really big help. We're going to be meeting our panelists in just a moment, but first, a word of thanks and some housekeeping notes. So to Joe Swimmer, Dina Helderman, the Bishop McCann crew, everybody involved to bring us SEEP 2021, to pivot with all of our virtual wonder. Gosh, that is an awful lot of work. Thank you so much for taking the time to do it. I also want to give a massive shout out to the programming team for today's sessions, Jason Merritt, Ali Gannett, and Natalie Hill. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to work with you in putting this together. And now a few housekeeping notes. As I mentioned, the chat lines are open. Okay, that sounds kind of weird. Chat lines are open. But there's a slight difference. We're used to just being on Zoom, and there is the Zoom chat. We are monitoring that. But as you know, the moment the session ends, the chat goes away. So in the Whova app, where most of you are engaged, you're going to see both a commenting field and a question and answer field. Please feel free to put your topical questions for discussion in the Q&A. And if you just have random commenting, please put that in the commenting, and we are tracking those. For those that need it, the bathrooms are going to be outside my door to the, oh no, wait, you don't need that. We'll skip that. So without further ado, let's get to our panelists, starting with Karis. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do. And I prepped most of the panelists while we were waiting to begin. There are 4 categories that I'm going to have you choose from to add on to your introduction. Either tell us your favorite vacation spot, your favorite food dish, Mac versus PC, or Netflix versus Disney. So take a minute to introduce yourself and one of those, starting with Karis. Go.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Those are all four of those. I want to answer all of them, but I will pick one. My name is Karis Bhaginathan. I am the Director of Communications at the Episcopal Church Foundation, and I'm also the editor for ECF Vital Practices. I also am a board member for Episcopal Communicators. So I'm really happy to be kind of representing and sharing with you all. Delighted to be here, really excited about this conversation. And Steve, to answer your question, I have to pick favorite vacation spot because, I mean, come on, like that's what we're all dying to do over here. So for me, I'd have to say Thailand. I've been there 4 or 5 times. It is stunning. The food is incredible, as I'm sure most of you know. The views are beautiful. I really, truly just can't wait to go back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kendall, please start.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kendall Martin. I'm the communications manager for Episcopal Migration Ministries, and that's the refugee resettlement and migration ministry of the Episcopal Church. And in that role, I manage our internal and external communications, and I support our network of 12 local resettlement partners across the country. And I'm going to go with a Netflix Disney question because I have a 7 and 8-year-old boys. And so I'm going to go with Disney.
All right.
Yes.
Next up, Creighton Webb.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. My name is Creighton Webb. I'm joining you all from Dallas, Texas. So I'm a recovering journalist. I was a television news reporter for about 10 years, and then I guess bad went to worse, and I got into politics and was the chief of staff for the mayor in Dallas, and then became a lobbyist. So even worse, went to work for Mary Kay Cosmetics for 12 years. So we all have people in our life who keep us humble. My mom and my wife are those two people. So my mom likes to say, now I just need to be a used car salesman and a game show host to ensure I never go to heaven. Actually, she doesn't say it quite that politely. So I'm just trying to be on my best behavior. And then about 3.5 years ago, I had a chance to buy a public relations, public affairs firm here in Dallas called SunWest Communications. So we do strategic communications, a lot of media relations, a ton of crisis communications, social media, creative services, as well as government affairs and corporate social responsibility work for our clients. My most important job is I've got 4 children with my wife. So age range 10, 12, 8 boys, and then a 4-year-old girl. Definitely have to pick vacation spot. So favorite vacation spot is a little island called Mystique. It's 3 square miles in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And last time we were there, we actually got to snorkel 20 feet away from Prince William and Kate, who happened to be there at the same time vacationing. So we felt very swishy, far more important than we deserved.
Wow, that actually sounds amazing. Next, last but certainly not least, Ryan Casey Waller.
Hi, good morning. I'm also joining you from Dallas this morning, and I am a therapist here in private practice in Dallas. I'm also an author. Just recently had a new book come out on depression and anxiety. And before that, I'm an Episcopal priest. I worked within the Episcopal Church for almost 10 years, first in a college preparatory school and then at a church here in Dallas. So that's me. And like Creighton, my most important job, married, have 2 little kids who are fantastic, 2 little boys. And in terms of the PC and Mac question, I'm confused because I wasn't aware that they were still producing and selling PCs. So I guess I'm Mac. Yeah, adios, right? Anyway, I couldn't turn on a PC. I have no idea what that is. So that's me.
All right. Well, thank you very much, panelists. As we dive into things, let me say just a word about our format. For each topic, I'm going to be calling on one of the panelists to open. We're going to try and keep each topic to about 5 minutes. Once they have made their opening remarks, the other panelists will then join in the conversation, and we'll try to keep that going pretty quickly. Panelists, please keep your remarks as succinct as possible so that we can stay on schedule. To that, our first topic is actually an icebreaker for all the panelists. Some people have an informal process while others have charts and graphs. As succinctly as possible, tell us what your functional stages of crisis communications are. Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go first. So I think for us at ECF, there are parts of it that I think are more formally kind of put down on paper, but a lot of it is also figuring stuff out as we're in it because of kind of the different kinds of communications crisis. But I think the kind of common steps for me across events or incidents would include things like relaying current factual information to our spokespersons, establishing credibility, verifying our sources, at least for us, beginning to immediately identify what are the resources that our audience might need to kind of address the immediate crisis. And then, of course, things like tracking, organizing resources as the situation evolves, how you're sort of planning to address this with internal and external audiences. And I'll just say a quick word about sort of this particular event that we're all in, and sort of early March last year. I think that a big part of the plan was convincing people to kind of really start taking this seriously really quick. A lot of my job was actually kind of sort of sharing and trying to get people on board with the fact that this is likely not going away. And so the sooner that we take this situation seriously, the sooner we'll be able to kind of start getting our plan in motion.
Creighton.
All right. Well, I'll jump in the absence of another. I'm in the unique, and I guess I have the benefit of oftentimes we're advising clients that are in crisis. So it's an enviable position to be able to help advise someone else as opposed to when you're going through crisis yourself. Of course, we've all over the last year had to deal with crisis comms in one way or another. I like to say that you're at least adept at this in my chair when a crisis starts to begin looking a little bit like the Matrix, meaning you can see the proverbial figurative bullet coming on behalf of your client, and you can move in enough time or advise them to move in order to see it. The first thing, Steve, is to activate your plan. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but that infers that you have a crisis communications plan, and that is absolutely critical in this day and age. That is not, and again, we'll talk about this later, that's not the only solution to a response to crisis comms. And I don't mean to insinuate that this is formulaic in any way, but if you noticed or have noticed brands and individuals who've responded well in crisis and leave the crisis with their reputation intact, there are certain attributes to their responses. 3 things. First, they acknowledge the accusation or just outright apologize. And the example that comes to mind for me time and time again in media training or crisis training is Starbucks 2.5, 3 years ago when they had their situation in Philadelphia where 2 Black men came in and were refused use of the facilities. Starbucks was out immediately took responsibility. Second was a statement of truth. This is not who we are. This is not what we believe in. This is what we stand for. And then third was, this is what we're going to do about it. And now, while Starbucks' statement of what we're going to do changed, at first they didn't know, and that's perfectly acceptable to say, we're studying what our response should be, and we will respond within 24 hours. But within 24 hours, they did what they said they were going to do. They responded, and they said, we're going to shut our stores down and do racial sensitivity training for a full day. So again, I don't want to insinuate that responding to a crisis is as easy as a formula. And yet, if you look at the ones who come out of it relatively unscathed or still alive, still surviving, they tend to do those 3 things. I'll stop there.
Okay. Kendall.
Yeah, sure. I think I would just add that because of the nature of our work, we do have a pretty solid formula for how we address crisis communications in terms of identifying who needs to be alerted within our leadership chain, who has final sign off. We have holding statements, we're ready to go at any time. And we have already identified which method are we going to use to communicate with which stakeholder. And we also have the benefit of, because we are a nonprofit that is in a public-private partnership with the government, we're a member of a lot of coalitions. And so we do our best to really follow suit with our colleagues in terms of when are we responding, how are we responding, what is the message? And I think that really helps keep us in line when we're trying to figure out how to respond.
Thank you. Ryan, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I'm not sure this question is as on point for me, in my field, but I can say that something that really rings true with me, Creighton said part of the organizations that respond and do well, give a statement of truth. And so I think that for people individually in our own mental health, when we feel as though what we're doing is aligned with our values, right? We tend to have a great sense of peace there, that there's not this sort of duplicitous deal that we're needing to communicate something that doesn't actually, isn't actually like a value that guides us, is important. And so I guess if I were thinking about it from an organizational perspective, I would want to know exactly what those values are ahead of time. And so then if there's some sort of action or event that is steered outside of what our established values are, then we've got a place that we can return to say this is not actually who we are, and we have that established. And it sounds like everyone that's spoken has said that's something that's in place ahead of time. But that authenticity, so we don't create a splitting mentally, is important for psychological well-being.
So what I'm hearing so far is having a plan ahead of time based on values, that you shouldn't hesitate in implementing that plan when crisis arises, and that Ryan adds, and then Ryan, I'm so glad that we have you here to add this perspective, but I'm almost sensing a sense of sustainability and peace, because if none of that has happened, you are on nothing but adrenaline. You're simply responding, you're reacting in probably the worst possible way. And we've all been there. I've been there. And so we're gonna dig in a lot more. And we're going to start now, jumping into the meat of it with Creighton. Let's kill the suspense. Creighton, are we still in crisis communications? I mean, it's been a year of continual crisis response. Is this even sustainable? Or has normal been redefined as this new status quo we live today?
Well, I think the short answer is yes to the latter, and also yes to the former. We still are in crisis. But I think from a sociology perspective, perhaps, and just where we are as a culture when it comes to consuming news or information, I think we're in perpetual crisis. And I think that's only 20 years ago, we were talking about the 24-hour news cycle. That's just a joke, because now it's the 24-second cycle. And if you are prolific on social media, you are bombarded by information constantly. And let's be frank, good, happy information that is positive and good for our hearts and souls, that doesn't sell. We all remember the Jerry Springer show. What's your 21st century version? Is it the Real Housewives? If it weren't a train wreck, we wouldn't watch. And that's why I think, in the season of Lent, you see so many people deciding they're going to give up social media or step away from it, because you just don't put your phone down feeling good about yourself, do you? It's constantly negative. So I think this is part of who we are now as a society, and I think we have to be very deliberate about the way we participate. I also think, and I assume we'll talk about this a little bit later, if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to do it for you. And if you're a brand, even if you're a church, you're a brand, and to some degree, getting people in pews, getting people to listen, getting people to follow you, even getting people to congregate online requires, and these may be distasteful words, but but requires some degree of, at what the end of the day, are really sales and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but how do you tell your story and be on social media and still be a person who is humble and not appear or come across as braggadocious? So anyway, from a crisis communications perspective, I think the mistake that has been made time and time again over the last year is that brands who are being attacked, individuals who are being attacked, their instinct is to hunker down and to hope that it'll just go away. And that somehow the traditional media will go decide to cover the Muffin Festival instead, and that's just not realistic. It's going to get covered if it's that kind of story. And so the good brands, the individuals who represent those smart organizations, and let's be honest, the faith community and our churches are a brand, as I said. Instead of hunkering down or hoping it'll go away and ignoring the situation, when their reputation is being attacked, they're getting out in front, they're working their plan, but they're probably going great guns in communicating in order to ensure that their narrative is heard. So this is the new normal, and I think we have to be prepared for it in our business lives, and in our personal lives, we have to decide what boundaries we're going to set for our own mental health.
Panelists, what response?
Oh, I was just going to say that, especially within the world of EMM, the last 4 years has been nothing but crisis communication for us with regard to refugees and immigration. And then COVID was another layer. And so we've had to learn how to sustain that. And I think that one of the biggest things is that there might continually be new negative news that needs to be reported, or you have to communicate out that you don't have the answers and you don't know when things are going to be better or normal again. And the way that we have found to balance that is that, yes, you still have to report the crises and the negative, but you can also balance that with the positive. You can still give people hope. There are stories that are positive and uplifting that I think need to continue to be shared in addition to all of the crisis communications that we're putting out.
Any other responses? Go ahead, Casey. Ryan?
Jump in. Acknowledging that the industry that all of you are in has been in sustained crisis, as Kendall just said, in her case, for a period of 4 years. It's important to acknowledge that human beings are not designed to remain in crisis for that long. So if we're in a situation in which we are constantly having to react, we can do that, and we're designed to be able to do that for short periods of time, right? The fight or flight, we can do it. What we cannot do without suffering a deterioration in our own mental, physical, emotional, spiritual health is do it forever. And so if the reality is, though, that the demands of the moment are requiring communications to remain in crisis mode, then as individuals, it becomes that much more important to acknowledge that you can't do this on your own, and that you have to step back and allow yourself to exist as though that crisis weren't constantly occurring. There has to be some kind of relief. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you're going to suffer PTSD, which that word, that diagnosis gets thrown around far too loosely, these days, but it's real and it's serious, and no person's immune from it. And so if you remain in crisis and reaction mode for long enough, then your brain gets tricked into thinking that it's forever in danger, and then it remains at that heightened state, which eventually is going to play itself out in some kind of harmful way. And so I would think something that would be important to be aware of is, how are you finding respite in these moments where you can legitimately step back and understand that the crisis is still being handled, but it can be handled without you from time to time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan. To try and stay on schedule, we're going to move along to the next point. This one's starting out with Karis, the whiplash effect. While I survived the crisis whiplash back in March, I want to do more than that. So how can I actually thrive again amidst this ever-changing landscape of unrest?
For me personally, I think really thriving means being able to look outside of like the routine stuff and spend some time thinking strategically, thinking creatively. And so the challenge for me, I think, was in March, April, May last year. The focus really was on surviving, and rightly so. I think, it took time to kind of not only internalize what was happening, but also really deal with this idea of kind of grief and loss, that we were all in this together. This wasn't your typical crisis where it was out there happening to someone else. All of us were in it, and we were having to kind of go through major changes in our lives and kind of figuring out how to deal with that. And so that was definitely survival mode. But one of the first steps that we took as ECF was really survey our audience to see how they were doing during this time, how they were feeling, what they needed from us. And while surveying our constituents is a routine practice at ECF, it was just so much more critical to do this now, because we realized that the pandemic was really being experienced by people in such different ways. And then we took the results of that survey to really then begin to plan how we want to address it, what kind of resources we want to create. And that movement really was kind of able to thrust me into a more creative, thriving space in terms of my work. The one kind of thing that I identify that I'd love to kind of just share with you all is that I think during this time, while there's so much routine stuff that we need to get to as communicators, kind of just get things done, this is also kind of the perfect time to try new things and to experiment, because in a sense, there aren't rules anymore about what's right, because our normal has shifted. So if you've been meaning to try something that you think might be great, I think that kind of creating that space and time and giving yourself permission to try that, to go into experimenting, creating something new, this is actually the best time to do it. So I really encourage you guys to try that if you've been sitting on something that you think might be good.
Panelists, and your response? I like that I'm hearing, Karis, you bring up a very interesting point. As communicators, there's so much of what we do that actually is, and I agree with Creighton, it's not meant to be formulaic, but let's face it, it's funny how the people who are prepared get lucky a lot. There's that saying. And so it is part of our job to ideate out various things that could happen and be ready at different levels and varied levels of preparation for that. But there's no precedence for this. The amount of time that we have been engaged cyclically with 1,000 different variations on a theme simultaneously, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think you bring up something that is really actually kind of poignant, and that is we have to have a starting point of being prepared, having those plans in place. At the same time, pretty quickly, I think it may have dawned on us, this might be the long haul. And surveying our constituents to learn how to better engage them for their needs over a much longer period, and having that data to inform and fine tune that plan. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to move on now, moving to Kendall. We're going to be talking about sustained stability. Kendall, what are the bedrock activities that ground your day-to-day? And with that, how can one regain focus on core activity and basics when they're constantly being pulled multiple directions by circumstances and probably stakeholders?
So I would say that the bedrock of my work is really based on a focus on what our mission and our values are. So our identified mission of education and advocacy and engagement. And so in order to fully live into that mission, I have to focus on the activities that are going to help our organization succeed in those areas. And in this line of work, we're responding to an ongoing crisis. And like in any type of work, things can become demanding and your life around your work becomes demanding, as we're all collectively experiencing during this pandemic. And it becomes really important when things get chaotic to examine what's on my list and then ask myself, is this going to move things forward? Is this helping to elevate and amplify the voices and the stories that I'm trying to tell? And I think that the other part of it really is having open and transparent communication with my colleagues. I think it's vital to ensure that we're all on the same page in terms of what our priorities are, and that we're on the same timeline, and that we're asking ourselves as a team those questions. And are we working, just for our task lists, which of course have their own place, right, for streamlining our work, but are our priorities getting lost in the radio noise of the deadlines? And so I think it's just finding those things that really help you focus in on the mission and then putting your energy there.
Great responses.
Well, a couple of things come to mind for me. First, I'm not sure that I qualify as an entrepreneur, but as a relatively new small business owner, I find that I'm constantly eating my words from my corporate days. Let me tell you what I mean. I used to say to my team all the time, hey guys, hope and prayer ain't a strategy. Well, let me tell you, as a small business owner, hope and prayer are absolutely business strategies. And in fact, my faith journey just personally has grown exponentially over the last 3.5 years. You asked what the bedrock is. It's just understanding that I'm not in control and being, I never really understood what handing it over literally meant. And so I've really had to grow and make sure that I'm taking time, typically early in the morning, just to pray and to be thoughtful and to make sure that I'm staying grounded on the most important things. Because you're tired at the end of the day, and you want to make sure your family doesn't get the rest of you, that they get the best of you. I would say second is, and this is, I don't mean to be trite in saying that it's the people, but I think it is incumbent upon all of us in any kind of leadership situation to surround ourselves with people who are quote unquote smarter than we are. And Mary Kay Ash said, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, use them proportionately. As you can tell, based on my lack of succinctness, that's not exactly my strength. So I really, being a new business owner, have tried to, I need to surround myself with really smart people who will tell me not what I want to hear, but what I need to hear. And I need to create an environment that makes it safe and comfortable for them to do that. And I need to listen. And those have been 2 pieces for me.
Kendall, one of the things that you mentioned that I really like, I'm going to just kind of distill it down to the word intentionality. I'm sure every last stinking person here has been given missions and values, but it's really easy for that to be something that is either in the bulletin or hanging on the wall, but to have a point of being intentional enough to self-assess during the process. Is this task that I am currently doing actually furthering the ball down the field of the mission and values? I'm really just kind of talking to myself on that one, because the first thing when you're swamped to go is that type of intentionality. One of the things that I tell my team is assess everything in these rush times that have had dropped balls. And there's your next checklist to create. What is the value of that checklist? What is the purpose for that? I literally would like you to have that checklist on your desk when you're doing this task until it is smooth enough and we have built the habit to not get beyond ourselves, but to maintain that type of attention to detail, that we do not drop balls. And I mean, balls are going to get dropped. That's not the point, but it should be hopefully not the status quo. And so I really like that message of intentionality there. And Creighton, I completely hear you. As a missionary kid, hope and prayer. I kind of grew up on that. That was, I think, how our family subsisted a lot of the times. So thank you for that. Moving on. Now this next one is for Ryan, as we topically now are going to be turning our gaze from our craft, turning the lens inward to ourselves. Ryan, are there long-term effects of which to be cognizant with indefinitely sustained exposure to crisis, especially as a leader? How do we maintain sanity in the process? How do we care for ourselves?
Yeah, okay. Definitely, right?
Just an easy one.
Just an easy one. I mentioned, PTSD earlier. We've got to be aware, right? The sustained crisis is going to have deleterious effects upon you. A couple of things I would say, as leaders and folks who are having to communicate, I imagine that most of you spend a good deal of your time thinking about how others are going to be affected by the events that are going on. And you're concerning yourself with communicating, right, the message in such a way that it has the most positive effect on the people that are receiving your message as possible. And what you can't forget when doing that is that you're being exposed to the same trauma that they are, right? And so it's very similar to like secondhand trauma that you'll hear EMTs, police officers, nurses, doctors describe, that when they're constantly brought into situations that are traumatic, even though it's not themselves that are experiencing the trauma, they experience the effects of the trauma and thus have to process and be honest about that trauma as well. In this situation, I think it's probably easy for communicators and leaders at times to disassociate themselves from the trauma because you have a job to do. And we all need you to do that, and that's important. So while you do that, though, you need to be aware that whether or not you acknowledge that it's affecting you, it's affecting you. And so you've got to put that kind of awareness hat on, which leads me into what I really want to say is this. Oftentimes in our culture, the way that we've talked about mental health and mental illness is that we've taken a very binary approach. So to say that, let's sort of like, there are people who are mentally healthy, and then there are people who are mentally ill, and you're either one or the other. That kind of thinking is not only not evidence-based, but like it's not helpful. So what I would ask you to do is think about mental health on a continuum in the same way that we would think about it in terms of our physical health. So nobody can ever say at any one point in their life, I am completely healthy, right? I am in total health. What we mean to say is that if I'm on a continuum and health is over here and illness is over here, I'm further towards health. Mental health is the same way. If you've got mentally healthy right over here, you've got mentally ill here, at any given point in your life, you're somewhere on the continuum, right? These are not static states of being. So what that means is everybody is vulnerable to becoming mentally ill. Now, that's not to say, right, that everyone's going to be exposed or have certain serious mental ill conditions. Not the case, right? Just in the same way that not everybody's going to have diabetes, not everybody's going to have a tumor in their brain, whatever it might be, but we all have our health. And so as communicators and leaders, you've got to be aware that if you're not paying attention to your own mental health, right, even if you start really far over here, doing what you're doing, if you don't care for the your mental health, you'll begin to slide the other direction. So that's going to look differently for everybody. But 3 things that I can at least, recommend is that we know work when people are tending to their mental health. Your support network is massive. So human beings, right, that you can lean on, that can hold space for you, wildly important. An addiction psychiatrist once told me that even with his most ill patients, that if he can get them plugged into a community where they know people and they're known, then half of the battle is taken care of. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. Like, you know, you're like one of the most sophisticated addiction psychiatrists in the country. You're telling me that half of your job is accomplished if you can just get your patients to have a friend? And he's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Okay. So people, and then the other two, if there's actually mental health struggles going on, are availing yourself to mental health professionals, to psychotherapy, to the power of what can happen when you avail yourself to someone who's trained to listen to you and to diagnose and to look at what's going on. And then the third thing is medication, if that's appropriate. You know, actually opening yourself up to the kind of the modern miracle of psychotropic medication, if that's something that's needed, which is another way of saying tending to your biology. Might not be medicine, but it might be your diet, your exercise, whatever it is that you do with your body. So the three things, if we're just thinking about, okay, I'm on the continuum, mentally healthy over here, mental illness over here, right? Three legs to the stool, people, perhaps psychotherapy, and tending to the biological needs of your body, which might include medication. I'll stop there.
Dude, that's awesome. So as you were describing that, the first image that came to my mind is, what's the message that we hear every time we get on an airplane?
Put your mask on first.
Put your mask on first. You know, it's caring for yourself to make sure that you're in a position to care for others later, you know, for the duration. And you know, it also made me think, you know, in a manner of speaking, should we be looking at this almost like perhaps a medical doctor who's constantly in the ER, constantly under the gun? I mean, you know, my in-laws are doctors, and while they are very passionate and quite emotional people, the moment things turn medical at all, it's like whoosh, like they are so desensitized that, you know, they've almost detached themselves. And that's a key word, detached. We're going to circle back to that in one of our later topics. But thank you so much, because knowing that it's not absolutely one thing or the other, that we're working to skew our way towards healthy, and that we need to be making conscious, again, back to that intentionality, not only be intentional of what our company and stakeholders are about, but intentional about what we need as an individual. You know, I find myself, I expend myself like as the last concern all the time, and I got to stop doing that. When push comes to shove, I know what my body needs. I'm just preoccupied with other things, and I don't really think about it until push comes to shove. Suck in my gut. There, see, all better. Moving on, we're going to keep this continuity thread of care going, pivoting to Kendall with encouragement and words of advice for those who are either a one-person shop or perhaps wearing multiple hats beside communications. What tips do you have for someone perhaps with less resource than others might have, that might be feeling overwhelmed in the midst of their job, in the midst of all these hats, in the midst of a pandemic?
Well, I'm glad that you asked me that question because I am a one-person comm shop, and I also have fundraising and outreach and advocacy on my plate. So I'm going to give advice that I also am trying really hard to take. And the first part is honestly just identifying a reasonable number of priorities. I think as communication professionals, we get used to taking on a lot from other people and saying yes to a lot more than perhaps is reasonable. And so I think that it's really important, especially now, that we're communicating frequently and openly with our colleagues about the priorities we're working on. And I think that it's also a time for more hands on deck. I think that the more that everyone's on the same page, the more it's going to be easier to sustain this normal that we're living in now. And I think that we have to really focus on voicing what we actually need in order to be effective at our jobs without burning out. I think that we all need to be paying attention to what we can reasonably do and what we need from our colleagues in order to not burn out. And I think that needs to be like the first order of business right now.
Can I just jump in and add? I think sort of my one bit of advice about this is really just accepting that you're not going to be at 100% every day, and just being okay with that. We're in a pandemic. The fact that we're getting stuff done most of the time, doing such incredible work is just unbelievable. So, I mean, just sitting with that realization and being gentle on ourselves. You know, most of the communicators that I know, in my life, I'm friends with, are some of the most ambitious perfectionists I know. And so for that personality type and that style of person, it's very difficult to extend the same kindness you show to others to yourself. And so to be able to, like Kendall said, kind of reprioritize, give yourself permission to postpone or be more flexible about things, and really just be kind to ourselves and kind of acknowledge what we're all going through together, I think is really key.
I'm just seeing if anybody, Creighton, you unmuted. Did you have something?
Well, I was gonna add something. I agree with what Kendall and Karis have had to say, but just for the sake, if nothing else, of being provocative, let me offer an alternative point of view, and that is, I think, especially in the situation we've been over the last year, where it has been so long term and one crisis after another. The other hand of all of this is that sometimes it's healthy to be others focused. And the beauty of our roles as communicators, I've come to believe strongly that the greatest compliment you can give somebody is to ask their opinion. So when we as storytellers, which is our craft, when we're asked for counsel and advice, I think that can be very cathartic, and that it gets us out of our own heads and thinking about ourselves and our lives and our difficulties and troubles and tribulations, what's not going well for us, and allows us to focus on someone else's needs. And I think especially from a crisis comms perspective, the best thing that we can give our clients, stakeholders, or friends is being calm and helping them. Sometimes they're asking for help, other times they're just venting. And of course, that crosses the line. Both of those things are true, whether it's a professional circumstance or whether it's a personal circumstance. But being calm and being a good listener and being able to focus on someone else and their needs can also be, I would think, therapeutic in some ways also.
Nobody wants to be in my head. I promise you that. I don't know. I couldn't agree with all of you more. Folks, as a reminder, I hope that you're taking notes. These are all the topics and discussions. We've got some questions coming in on the big board we're going to try and get to at the end of this, but these are great discussion points for the small groups, the breakout groups that are going to be happening in session 2. Moving on, we're keeping the lens on us for just a little bit longer. Heading back to Ryan. This one actually hit me. As evidence of that, I couldn't figure out how to ask this question. So literally, let's see how this goes. And Ryan, you touched on this a little bit, and I mentioned earlier that made specific comment on the word detached, and here it comes. How can we maintain personal humanity as communicators during this indefinite breakneck pace we currently live? Put another way, it's so easy for us to become completely detached as we do our jobs. How can we stay connected and authentic to ourselves, connecting with our own humanity and emotions, while staying professional, functioning at a high level?
Yeah. Well-crafted question, I think, right? You got there. That's interesting, right? Because that piggybacks well on what Creighton was just saying. At a certain level, distraction, if you get in any kind of like recovery community, and you talk to folks who battle with any sort of substance, one of the main bits of advice that's often handed around is if you're struggling or you find yourself in a vulnerable moment, one of the most powerful things you can do is to go and help another person. Because if you're helping another person, right, it's going to distract you, at least momentarily, from whatever craving or whatever urging for some sort of self-destructive behavior you have. You're going to have to take your kind of inner monologue that's going on and put it onto somebody else, which is going to be good. And then also what's going to come out of that is you're going to actually help someone, which is good. And then when it's over with, you're going to feel good, right, about it. So here's the thing. So that's good, right? So while caring for ourselves, we have to put our mask on first. We can also then also recognize the value, right, of helping others, to help us do that. The difficulty, right, is to not become a robot. We don't want to get to a place where we have to sort of die a little bit to ourselves to get the job done, which I think is what you're getting at. How is it that we maintain, right, our humanity when we've got to go about doing something difficult and we have to compartmentalize maybe our own personal emotions from time to time? What's important to recognize is that you maintain your humanity by constantly reminding yourself that you are a human. You aren't anything other than a human, which means you're going to be affected by things that affect humans. So it is possible to compartmentalize and to focus and to do your job, but then you have to give your space, or you have to provide yourself and allow yourself the space to come off of that. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to grow cynical, and you don't want to have resentment for what you do. And that would be the primary thing I would say is the danger, is that when people serve other people long enough without caring for themselves, the primary emotion that gets sort of embedded in their heart and their mind is resentment, which the way that plays itself out is you begin to really hate the people that you're serving. And the way that you see that, you don't see it in overt hatred, you see it in what we call compassion fatigue. You find yourself simply not caring as much. And so when you find yourself not caring, then you notice that there's part of your humanity that's beginning to dwindle. Okay? And so if you remember that you're a human being, then if that's the case, then you can't be willing to sacrifice your humanity, because if you do, the resentment builds, right? And then that's what leads to burnout. So for everybody, that's going to be different, but you've got to find balance. The key is balance. If you can get to a healthy place where you've got the gallows humor, right, you can sort of operate. But if you ever get to the place where you discover that you're not caring as much, right, about the other human beings for whom you're trying to serve, that's a good place to press pause and to get back in touch with yourself and just to do a check-in as to what level of care you're providing for yourself. We want to compartmentalize at times, but we don't want to detach. We don't want to disassociate, if you will, right? You're a human, nothing more, nothing less.
So what I'm hearing, and I love the way you describe things. I'm going to extrapolate a little bit because I started building a binary model in my mind as you were talking. In most cases, if not all, with this group, I'm assuming that we are in our positions because we've got game. We know what we're doing. So we've got a bar of delivery that we should be at. The question is, as we enter the fire of either crisis communications or chaos, there are things that begin to drag on us and weigh us down. And what I'm hearing that in how to mitigate that is that we've talked about things on the work side, being intentional, being strategic, having your preparation done ahead of time, being transparent and communicating with your colleagues and your stakeholders. But on the self side, this other side here, that we have to remember that we're human, that we have to know our limitations, that we have to depend on our network and our support. But we also have to have that intentionality of self-assessing. How am I? Every day in the process, at one point, should we be stopping to ask ourselves, how am I doing? And that we must maintain that balance and care for ourselves. And that, for me, it sounds like the overarching thing is an intentionality based on this discovery of this model that is very much replete with two sets of tasks. One that allows me to I'm already doing this job, but if I take care of this side, I get to stay at a high level. You know, that's just where my mind went. Panelist, does that sound right? Am I in left field? All right. Thank you, Ryan, very much. Kendall, you just popped up on my screen. Were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just going to affirm what you said.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that was really great, Ryan. Thank you. We're sticking with you for Ryan, a short add-on for the person that says, "I feel like I have to be perfect all the time." What do you say to them?
Oh, kill the idea. I despise it. And look, this is coming from someone with I'm a striver, always wanting to be challenged. I want to do the best possible work I can do. I've beat myself up my entire life, right, for not being perfect all the time, want to be on. Here's what I know in terms from a psychological perspective, right? The notion that you're gonna be perfect is ridiculous, because nobody is, right? Nobody hits it all the time. But even just this idea, what I would say is like this veneer of wanting it is I think we're beginning to see some backlash from that, right? So all of us recently, and you guys know this better than I do in communications, like so much of it is about like presenting, you know, controlling the narrative and putting out that which you want to put out and holding back that which you don't want to put out. And all of that makes sense, right, strategically, and it needs to be done. That being said, like what we are beginning to value more in this culture is when we get peaks into genuine authenticity, moments of imperfection from people, when they're willing to be vulnerable and show that they're not perfect and that they are just, you know, doing the best that they can. And we're drawn to that because it reminds us and it gives us this relief that, oh my gosh, maybe perfection's not the goal afterwards. I mean, I look at it this way, and this might be too Christian of an approach, but like we often read like the Bible like through a Platonic lens, right? So we look at when we read the old Genesis story and it talks about the Garden of Eden and everything being perfect, like that's not the language that's actually used. The Hebrew language that's used there is that God created everything and it wasn't perfect. That's what Plato basically thought about. It was good. It was good. Things were good. And so I often talk to clients who are obsessed with this feeling of imperfection or perfection, which only breeds toxic shame, and instead flip it and talk about, what does good mean to you? What does it look like for goodness to reside and for you to feel good about what you're doing versus trying to be perfect? And so again, maybe from the perspective of communications, you return to the values again. And if the actions that you're taking are in line with your values, I would describe that as good. And to me, that's far more helpful than trying to be perfect, which you're never going to be anyway.
Panelists? Yay, nay?
I agree. And I think, especially as church communicators, again, it really helps to remind ourselves why we're in this at all. You know, over the past year, especially in our Episcopal Communicators Facebook group and that network, we've shared our challenges, our shortcomings, the times that we missed a deadline and Facebook Live didn't stream and how frustrating it is. And so, yes, the community has been incredible and that's important. But we've also been able to remind each other and ourselves that we're in this because of our faith, because of Jesus. And at the end of the day, perfection isn't the goal. It absolutely cannot be. And I agree with Ryan, especially not this year. This isn't the year to kind of heal ourselves doing everything. So trying to remember that, trying to refocus and really think about why we're in these roles at all, and how what truly matters really then begins to put some of those smaller mishaps and challenges into perspective, I think.
Thank you, Karis. I agree completely. You know, we're kind of talking about things that pull at us, and I grew up on my dad. I can't remember who the author was. It's this little tiny booklet. It was called The Tyranny of the Urgent, and that there is a difference between things urgent and things important. So this next one, pivoting back to Kendall, how can we maintain proper priorities when the urgent is constantly threatening the important?
So I think that the first step really is identifying a clear understanding within your organization about what warrants urgent. My experience is that one person's urgent is not necessarily someone else's. So I think that when we're focused on being proactive and not being reactive, I think that it's much easier for us to identify when the urgent really should supersede the important and when it actually can wait. And I think that if your priorities are in line with your organization's stated values or mission, going back to that, then I think that it's much easier to focus on the next important task with enough flexibility to change course if something really does warrant urgent attention.
What do you think? Creighton's shaking his head yes. Karis, anything you want to add to that? I'm shaking my head yes. Yes.
I mean, I'd like to add that just there's always something urgent in our line of work, right? Like there's always things that come to us and people are like, this needs to happen right now. And so I think especially in a crisis situation, really knowing what to prioritize, and again, kind of coming back to what I said at the start, is really giving yourself the permission to reschedule, reprioritize is key. I really do believe that sometimes saying no isn't a bad thing. And sometimes it's exactly the right thing to say, because it gives you a chance to kind of revisit when you're able to truly come to it in the right way.
I would add, I really like in the chat Natalie Hill's comment about don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think if there ever were a statement that was more apropos, it's really in crisis communications, because again, going back to what I said earlier, I see so many organizations and individuals, when the crisis hits, they want to bury their head in the sand. And that was very true with COVID. And even internal communications, it certainly was true following the murder of George Floyd and Memorial Day. And while there was, certainly, best practices around social media have always dictated that you don't stick your nose in a issue in society unless you're ready to stay in it. In other words, if you're posting after every after a tornado and saying our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of the tornado in Joplin, Missouri, do your stakeholders now expect you to post every time there's a tornado? And somebody going to ask you, okay, well, why didn't you on this one? Or what about mass shootings? When do we weigh in and when do we don't? George Floyd was really a game changer. So many folks just decided to bury their head in the sand and not do anything. And I think crisis communications dictates getting out early and often, even if you have nothing new to say, touching base with your most important stakeholders. And I think this is absolutely true in our faith communities, knowing that you're aware of the situation, that you're on top of it, that you care about it, that you're concerned. And I think just because we're honed at our craft as storytellers doesn't mean that we can't encourage, if not push, our stakeholders to still be sensitive, because motives matter and people read through that. They can see that, they can tell. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Creighton. Stay right where you are because we are heading straight back to you. This is a follow-up to the opening salvo of how you define this time that we're in now. So following up on that opening, if we get desensitized because we are living this new paradigm of crisis comms, if this is the new normal, how do we then define crisis compared to what's normal to us now and recognize it?
Well, if the phrase "you're on mute" was the phrase of 2020, the word of 2020 was pivot, right? Aren't you sick of hearing "let's pivot"? But I mean, that's the truth, and I think that's the world we live in. I'm not so sure that being a little desensitized to everything that's going on may not be a terribly bad thing. To some degree, just as a self-defense mechanism, being a little bit desensitized, considering all the things, and if things happen in threes, 2 weeks ago here in Texas, we had Snowmageddon, Snowvid 2021 hit us. Texans aren't prepared for temperatures in the single digits. So, look, there's always something. And isn't that true in life as well? I had a mentor who once said, life is divided into 3 parts. You're either going into the storm, you're in the storm, or you're coming out of the storm. He actually added an expletive before storm, which I won't repeat here, but you get where I'm going. So I think there's a couple things. And again, at the risk of repeating myself, one, we've already said, you've got to have a crisis plan, a crisis communications plan, so that you can activate the plan and be ready to go, and that you're not surprised. I think the second, as it relates to, and I don't know if the word is desensitizing, but I'll say from a reputation perspective, I call it building up goodwill in the bank of public trust, creating the benefit of the doubt. And it goes back to something I said earlier. If you don't tell your story, somebody else will do it for you. So the cliche is, but it's true, the best defense to a crisis is an offense, which means, and this goes back to something Kendall said earlier, telling your positive stories on a regular basis. And I think utilizing and leveraging the tool that we have that is so prolific in social media right now, providing your stakeholders and followers with bite-sized chunks of content that's very shareable, short videos, blogs, even pursuing a thought leadership strategy that not if something bad happens, but when it happens, there has been enough positive news that you all have put out on your owned content that folks will give you the benefit of the doubt and will be your friends and fans, will even defend you in the public space. So I think that proactive piece is really important. And I don't know that that means desensitizing your audience in so much as it means preparing them and giving them your full narrative so that when that crisis occurs, not only do they give you the benefit of the doubt, but they stick with you.
Team, any additional thoughts? Creighton, thank you for that. We're going to, I'm checking the time here. We've got a few questions that have come in. And again, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but that's almost by design because of the breakout session happening next in about an hour and a half or so. So please take note of the topics and questions that you're going to want to revisit in your breakout rooms because there's a lot of good stuff here. Thank you, Jason. He has been madly shuffling questions on the big board for the number of votes they've got. Number 1, panelists, speak of frequency. Proactive, transparent communications helps address anxiety. Flooding people with communications causes anxiety. What's the right balance?
Well, I have an opinion on this, but for the sake of variety, I was going to let my colleagues go first.
Creighton, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think the short answer is it's really omni-channel. Like we have to be using multiple channels, but I don't know about you, but there are a handful of emails that I get on a daily basis that you just have to unsubscribe to. It's just too much. If we're communicating in the same way over and over, not only is it too much, but it's just not effective because it becomes, whether it's in the spam folder or literally spam, we're not paying attention. So what I like to say is there has to be a steady drumbeat of positive news. You know, on one extreme, it's the constant email blasts and texts, the daily social media posts, and it almost looks like it's robo posting, right? It's lost the heart, it's lost that authenticity. Maybe it doesn't have the human element or even feature real people and real stories. And I think we're discerning, right? We can tell the difference if this is just a marketing piece or if there's some real value that goes to this. The other extreme is that when we've got good news to share, we just wait for the good news. And then from a communications timeline perspective, there's this burst, right? Like we just had the groundbreaking or we just launched the campaign. And then instead of it being a burst and a hum with a steady drumbeat, it's a burst and then a flatline, and we don't hear from you at all. So I think there's got to be a balance. It means using all of your channels. It means being creative. It means being a good storyteller, and oftentimes good storytelling, in fact, all the time. I mean, think about your best movies. Think about the best books. Think about the best sermons. They all include stories of real people. Here's the last thing I'll say as it really relates to each of us and our, I guess, online personas, our thought leadership portfolios. I think people can also tell when we're being real and then when we're just trying to gen up business or it's just about sales and marketing. So I think the question to ask yourself is, do I really have something to say? And do I really have some value to give? I'll give you an example. And I've struggled with this because, again, I told you, I go on Facebook and I feel less good about myself because it's what party did I not get invited to or what vacation did I not go on? You know, I mean, it's everybody putting out their best selves and not their real selves. We do this segment called 2 Minutes of Advice from SunWest, right? It's a video that we shoot every other week and different team members do it. And it takes an example in the news, and it's usually here's what somebody did well and here's what somebody didn't do well. Now, what I hope it never comes off like is a marketing sales kind of thing. If it feels salesy, nobody's going to watch, nobody's going to listen. But I mean, we hope it gives somebody some real good tidbits of advice. We're not giving away the farm. They're not going to watch it and go, oh, now I don't need a PR firm. But hopefully it's valuable. On the other hand, we don't want them watching it and going, oh, that's so smarmy. All they're trying to do is get me to log on or sign up for their newsletter or go to their website. So I think we have to be very intentional. And just like you have a crisis communications plan, I think we have to have a plan for the cadence of our communications that we push out.
So I'm hearing a few different values, but there's a background word that goes to what you're saying, but it also is, in my experience, a foundational point of our behavior under normal circumstances with communications, and that is reliability. You know, what is the golden rule of podcasting and posting? That if when you start this thing, whatever frequency you can do, come hell or high water, that's what you maintain. And if you can increase that later and be reliable, then increase it then. But don't start out gangbusters and then back off, because if people are looking for your voice, expecting it to be there, and it's not, they just went to listen to somebody else. But when you apply that to this and to our people, our constituents, that we are looking at the value of do we really have something to say, and measuring that against creating a sense of, you know, with crisis communications, there right off the bat, there is not a precedence, a prescription of do it every 10 minutes, do it every hour. I mean, it depends on the situation. So we're literally building our own precedents of how do we create reliability for our people. Do you know your people? Let me start there. We should probably have a good idea of who they are and understand their points of consumption. But one of the questions that I want to throw back to the group is, as you're strategizing this in advance to create that cadence, as Creighton mentioned, you're looking at what if we are creating that moments of reliability, and we think, knowing our people, we need to post on this frequency. But to Creighton's point, do I really have something to say? Well, what if on a couple of those frequencies that you would be posting something, there's no new news? What is your method of authenticity in meeting the people and resonating them when nothing has changed in that little tiny cycle? How are you going to handle that? And I open that up to the group.
I think for me, and this is like communications 101, but I like to think of good communication as being really a two-way street. And we think about this all the time. And very often when we're kind of considering how frequently and what to post, it's really, how do we get our information, our news out there to people? Sometimes it's really helpful to ask a question, to see how people are feeling about something. So to answer your question, Steve, like when there are times when I don't want to repeat myself or there's no new information, is that a good opportunity then to ask my audience a question? It could be something as simple as, right now in a pandemic, even asking how you are is an incredibly vulnerable, important question to ask. So am I reaching out to them to kind of hear how they're feeling? There might be something specific I'd like to ask them about. Are they happy with what they've been receiving? It could be a variety of things. It could be us posting a picture on social media and asking them to share something they're feeling, looking at the picture. The opportunities are endless, but really just thinking about how I can engage and kind of really initiate communication from my audience, and to be cognizant of that fact as well.
That's really good. I like that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just say that we have certainly run into the question of, is this adding value? And I think that we really try to focus on whether or not we're communicating something as a standalone versus waiting to put it in a newsletter, how often we're posting on social media. Is really asking the question, is this adding value? Or am I just trying to find content to make sure that my audience is hearing from me? And as we've really started to live into making sure that there is a good reason to share it, I feel like our audience has grown exponentially, and people are very forthcoming with what it is they want from us. And so I think you have to keep asking the question periodically, what that we offer you brings you the most value, and then reassess what exactly are your priorities.
Thanks, Kendall. So as we wrap up this question before we move on, one of the things that I'm hearing is, we need to be prepared. Part of that is knowing our audience and crafting ahead of time, how frequently do we think that we're going to need in this moment? What precedents do we want to set to be reliable to our people, but that it might really behoove us then, knowing some of the times there may not be any new news. What are your content types? What are the types of things that you could share? Well, if there's news, you're probably going to share that. If there's not news, ask a question. What other types of things can you post that have value, to Kendall's point, that will create that further reliable connection with your people, so when you do have new news, they are going to be there to consume it. Moving on to the second most popular, here on the big board, as we may have taken on more daily and weekly projects to accommodate things within the last year, how might we possibly find the time and energy to work on projects outside of the same checklist of tasks that have to be taken care of each weekday? Let me say that again real quickly. As we may have taken on more daily and weekly projects to accommodate things in the last year, how can we possibly find the time and energy to also work on projects outside of the same checklist of tasks that have to be done as regular standard operating? Sounds like time management and priority questions. Who's our first victim? Karis.
I just want to say that, like, I hear you, whoever wrote that question. I wish I could hug you. I feel you. And, you know, this is something that we're all struggling with. It really, I know that, you know, when we say reprioritize, plan, you know, we hear that, but it's hard to do. But the one thing I'd like to sort of share, and it kind of goes back to that personal humanity question we dealt with earlier, is have a think about what the overlaps might be between your day-to-day work and then your passions and beliefs. For me, last year, I worked on this project that really gave me, that I was kind of doing my work, but it was also a really, it was a creative break and a space for me to really kind of feel better mentally. I personally am really committed to an anti-racist church, a just world. And so I was able to work on a racial justice project that was in July last year. So you can imagine how sort of in the middle of everything that was, link that to my work. And that really resulted, like, I'm still kind of on a high from that work that I was able to do last year because it was so personally enriching to me. So I'd encourage you to think about, are there any overlaps between your work, things that you can kind of connect, put together, and kind of create a creative outlet for yourself. So that in those instances, while you're still working really hard, you're fulfilling a deep need in yourself, and you're kind of creatively satisfying yourself as well. And then of course, the reprioritizing, rescheduling, and it's being okay to say no, or not just now, or I'll get to it in a bit, you know?
I'll agree with Karis. This question encapsulates my daily existence. I feel like this is the professional version of growing up in a missionary family and looking at the bill lottery each month. Okay, which bills are we going to pay? It's like I'm looking at all of the deliverables, and it's like, okay, well, you know. But I think we're going back again to intentionality, back to self-assessing, back to mission and values and priorities, great communication with your colleagues. And Kendall mentioned it a number of times, the notion of value and tying in the urgent and the important. Is these things that you have opportunity to do outside, are they urgent or important? Do they further your ball down the field of mission and value or personal health? You know, let's not assume this is just about the work side of that binary that we were looking at earlier. But is this something that, you know, let me, Creighton, I'm going to pivot. Let me pivot it to the personal side. You know, I've got a stair stepper in my house. It looks great. One of these days I'm going to get on it. You know, it's taking the time to assess value to something and it raising to the status of priority. Here at St. Michael, we're working on something called the EOS system, which is a management system, and we all operate off of something called rocks. The notion that if you have a cup and you fill it with sand, and rocks are the big things, you can't get the rock in anymore. But if you take the empty cup and you put the rocks in first, well, then you can pour the sand of all the little things in, and it kind of fills in the cracks. And so we have to have rocks on a set frequency, and that the definition of a rock is that we will do something at the expense of other things by a certain time. At the expense of other things. And so as I look at this question, I ask myself, is this really so important that it needs to be done at the expense of other things? I mean, this is an amalgamation of many things. We are almost out of time. And so let me quickly do a little closing things, and then we've got one last question for our panelists. I want to first say thank you to our panelists for joining us. Wow, you guys are amazing. You've given us a lot to think about and talk about in the next session. Don't forget the next session starts at 12:30 Central, 1:30 Eastern, where we're going to be breaking out into discussion groups to dig deeper into our personal experience and how to apply what we've learned this morning to better forward ourselves or better care for ourselves during these crazy times. Be sure to bring your questions. But first, panelists, this is an all play, and we're going to start with Kendall. If there is one thing you want people to walk away with, one thing, what is it?
So hard. I'm gonna go with to be flexible. This is an unprecedented time for all of us, and I like to go into every situation believing that everybody is doing the best that they can.
Thank you. Karis?
Steve, permission to do like too many things, to say too many things instead of one big thing.
I'll be flexible on that.
Thank you. One is just to say you all are just doing incredible, incredible work in a very unreal and unexpected landscape, and that there will be moments of creativity and just wonder, and there will be moments of complete breakdown. We're all going to be there, and this is normal. This is fine. Be gentle on yourself and be kind. And then the other thing is find community who understands you, who gets you, who you can yell with and scream with. I really want to share, if for anyone who's not familiar, please consider joining the Episcopal Communicators. It is an incredible peer support space and group. We give and share ideas, we support each other, and there's just incredible comfort in knowing that we're in the same boat, we're going through the same things, and that we're able to lean on each other during this time.
Creighton.
In the spirit of twos, number one, be prepared. It's not a matter of if the crisis is going to happen, but when. And number two, be proactive. If you don't tell your story, somebody else will do it for you, or worse yet, no one will.
Ryan.
In any given year, 1 in 4 Americans struggle with a mental health condition. And so given the fact that we're in a pandemic, you can only imagine what those numbers are. And that 1 in 4 is underreported. And so I would say at any point, if you feel like your distress is rising to the level where you think you might need some help with it, do not hesitate to say something. I know it's been a highly stigmatized thing in our culture, but the more people who raise their hand and ask for help are not only going to get help, but they're going to encourage other people to do the same. And we can reverse this trend. So by caring for yourself, you're going to help other people care for themselves, which could have generational impact. No shame.
Thanks, Ryan. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Panelists, seriously, again, thank you. Allie and Jason and Natalie, thank you again. Will, thank you for your leadership with the programming.
Steve, can I make one sort of announcement, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
Sorry. So thank you all. I just wanted to, because there's a level of trust here. It is being recorded, so I may eat these words. But as all communicators, thank you for. Well, I'm grateful that we didn't seem to have any technical glitches knocking on everything in my office. The rectors and deans and stewardship folks had a little mixer up. So that all seems to be well. Like Julian and Norwich said, all shall be well. So thank you all for your kindness, and we'll be back together in a little bit. One note I just wanted to say is this was recorded. And will be available for on-demand viewing and stuff at a later time. The breakout sessions will not be. So that is very intentional, because obviously we get into breakouts and talking about processing things, and just from level of comfort that, your rector is not going to receive a recording, or your boss or something. So just thought that would be a helpful note as people come back in. And we'll make sure that if some reasons one of those things are clicked that shouldn't be, that we'll get that figured out. So yeah, so thank you all.
Great, thank you, Will, so much. Go get some lunch. We'll see everybody back in about an hour. Thanks.